Hey there, all you beautiful Broadway brainiacs. Welcome back to Broadway by Ghostlight. I'm Mark Bonanni, and this is episode 37 of Broadway Jeopardy, the world's favorite niche YouTube musical theater trivia game. Probably. If you love Broadway, musical theater, and trivia, you're gonna want to hit that subscribe button so you never miss an episode. I've got 26 all-new clues ready to test your theatrical know-how, so without further ado, let's get right into this week's game. This is Broadway Jeopardy! Looking at this week's categories, we start off as always with last week's Final Jeopardy category, which is It Started at Encores, looking at some Broadway revivals that began life as part of the City Center Encores concert series. After that, we have Brooklyn. These are some shows set, at least partially, in the best New York City borough, Brooklyn. And yes, I do live in Brooklyn, so don't at me. Next up is the category History on Stage. This is a returning category about some plays and musicals based on real-life events. Then we have Turban Outfitters. This is a visual category looking at some characters from musicals who have sported turbans. Thank you to longtime player Christopher Bush and his whole wonderful family for that suggestion. And last but not least, we have Book, Music, and Lyrics, looking at some shows with one person having written book, music, and lyrics. And we end with the Final Jeopardy round, so keep track of your scores so you can wager some or all of it on that final clue. We begin as always with the $200 round, or the Overture round as it's known around these parts, where the clues are somewhat on the easy side to help you rack up some fake dough before I get into the harder clues later in the game. Let's start with the It Started at Encores category, and the first $200 clue. The most recent revival of this Sondheim musical began at City Center Encores, starring Sarah Bareilles, Neil Patrick Harris, and Heather Headley. What is Into the Woods? While Sarah Bareilles transferred with the show when it moved to Broadway, the other two stars I mentioned did not. Neil Patrick Harris, who himself replaced Christian Borle for the Encore's run, was replaced on Broadway by Brian Darcy James, and the great Heather Headley was replaced by Tony winner Patina Miller for the Broadway opening.
It's the last midnight, so good boy, oh, coming at you fast to midnight, soon you'll see the sky fall.
Moving on to the Brooklyn category, your next $200 clue is this Brooklyn set paranormal romantic drama, based on the film of the same name, featured the song Unchained Melody among its score. What is Ghost is the right answer. Based on the classic film starring Demi Moore, Patrick Swayze, and Whoopi Goldberg, the musical version started in London and then transferred to Broadway, starring Cassie Levy, feature Elsa on Broadway, and Richard Fleischman, both of whom originated their roles in London. The $200 clue in the History on Stage category is this 1999 Broadway review by Frank Wildhorn about one of the darkest times in American history found most of its cast wearing either blue or gray. What is the Civil War is the answer. Playing briefly on Broadway in 1999, the Civil War was a song cycle with no real through plot. In keeping with most Frank Wildhorn musicals, the critics absolutely panned the show, with most calling it generic and lifeless. One review of the show complained that every number, quote, offers one simple idea, then reiterates it into an overwrought, arms skyward, how long can I hold this glorious note climax. It goes on to say that the songs in the show practically slap the audience into giving an ovation. Despite its short run, The Civil War was nominated for Best Musical at the 1999 Tony Awards, losing to another review, Fosse.
The battle is near, and the moment is here. It's against me forever. When the blue meets the gray, every yellow will pay.
Looking at a lovely lady in a turban, your $200 visual clue is The legendary Angela Lansbury sported a turban when starring in the title role of this Jerry Herman musical. What is Mame? The beloved Angela Lansbury remains the only actress to originate the character of Mame Dennis in a Broadway mounting of the musical. The show has only been revived once on Broadway in 1983, but that production also starred Miss Lansbury in the title role. And finishing up the overture round in the book, music, and lyrics category, your last $200 clue is... Composer, lyricist, and book writer Lionel Bart took London and Broadway by storm in the 1960s with this musical about an orphan boy. What is Oliver? The classic musical opened in London in 1960 before crossing the pond to Broadway in 1963. With several lasting songs like As Long as He Needs Me, Where Is Love, Consider Yourself, and more, you'd think the show's book, music, and lyric writer Lionel Bart would sit pretty for the rest of his life at those royalties. Sadly though, that was not the case. Bart wrote several more musicals after Oliver, but none could be considered lasting successes. Bart put his fortune into one of those musicals called Twang, and it ended up being one of the biggest financial bombs in West End history up to that time. In financial ruin, Lionel Bart ended up selling the rights to Oliver for only £350, which was turned around and resold for over £250,000. I hope you got all of the glorious clues in that first round. Let's move on to the only slightly harder $400 round now. Circling back to It Started at Encores, your first $400 clue is... This revival, which started at Encores, is currently the longest running show on Broadway and the longest running American musical of all time. What is Chicago? The Kander and Ebb revival played Encores in May of 1996 as part of the third season of Encores. After raves at City Center, the revival transferred to Broadway at the Richard Rodgers Theater, where the original production of Chicago had opened about 20 years earlier, with its Encores cast intact, including Anne Reinking, Bebe Neuwirth, James Naughton, and Joel Grey. The show eventually moved to the Shubert Theater, where I first saw the show, and later the production moved again to the Ambassador Theater, where it currently still plays. To date, the hit revival has played over 11,000 performances and shows no sign of stopping anytime soon. Looking at my neck of the woods in Brooklyn, your next $400 clue is... The First, a short-lived musical about this trailblazing baseball player, features scenes set in Brooklyn's Ebbets Field, once home to the Brooklyn Dodgers. Who is Jackie Robinson is the answer. The musical, The First, opened on Broadway in 1981 and starred David Allen Greer as the baseball legend and pioneer Jackie Robinson. The show also starred Lynette McKee as Robinson's wife Rachel. Though the musical received some good notices by the critics, it failed to get one from the then all-important New York Times, and the musical closed after about a month. Looking at a play with the History on Stage category with the $400 clue, this classic courtroom drama from 1955 is a fictionalized version of the Scopes Monkey Trial about evolution. What is Inherit the Wind is the correct answer. As the clue stated, Inherit the Wind opened on Broadway in 1955 and was based on the real-life Southern trial of teacher John T. Scopes, who was prosecuted for teaching the theory of evolution to his students in 1925. The main characters in the play are the opposing lawyers in the trial, originated on Broadway by Paul Muni and Ed Begley. Besides the many different film adaptations of the play, there have been a few Broadway revivals, one in 1996 starring George C. Scott and Charles Durning, and another revival in 2007 starring Christopher Plummer and Brian Dennehy. I was the merch manager for that 2007 revival, and I got to see the show a few times, and it was incredible. And yes, we sold monkeys. Here's one of my original Inherit the Wind monkeys. Look at that cute face. Yeah, monkey. The $400 visual clue in the Turban Outfitters category is... In the hit musical Hadestown, the three turban figures seen here are collectively known as this in the show. What are the Fates is the correct answer. The three Fates in Hadestown are named, and I know I'm gonna butcher these, so forgive me, but they are named Clotho, who plays the violin, Lechesis, who plays the tambourine, and Atropo, who plays the accordion. The Fates comment on the action of the story and also sing out some of the inner thoughts of Orpheus and Eurydice, mostly focusing on their doubts and fears.
Who are you? Where do you think you're going? Who are you? Why are you all alone? Who do you think you are? Who are you to think that you can walk a road that no one ever walked before?
And the final $400 clue in the book, music, and lyrics category is Richard O'Brien had everyone jump to the left and then a step to the right while dancing this number from his cult classic musical, The Rocky Horror Show. What is the time warp? In the early 1970s, actor Richard O'Brien, to keep himself busy while looking for acting work, wrote The Rocky Horror Show, combining some of his favorite genres like B horror films and Steve Reeve muscle movies, and mining them for their campy schlock and unintended humor. What emerged was the definition of a cult hit. The show opened in 1973 in London and bounced around several theaters before finally reaching the West End proper for an extended run through 1980 after almost 3,000 performances. A jump to the left and a step right into the $600 round now. Back at It Started at Encores, the $600 clue is the last revival of Sunday in the Park with George started at Encores before transferring to Broadway with its stars Annalee Ashford and this Hollywood A-lister. Who is Jake Gyllenhaal is the answer. The Oscar-nominated actor has appeared in a few plays on Broadway like Constellations and Seawall / A Life, but Sunday in the Park with George remains his only musical outing so far, though I hope it won't be his last. He was quite good in Sunday in the Park with George. Gyllenhaal is gearing up to tread the boards once more this season in a ridiculously overpriced revival of Shakespeare's Othello along with Denzel Washington. Taking the Q train all the way to Coney Island now with the Brooklyn category and the $600 clue. Set in Brooklyn's Coney Island, the 1964 musical I Had a Ball starred this comedian known for the Herbie the Love Bug films as well as the film version of The Music Man. Who is Buddy Hackett is the correct answer. I Had a Ball opened on Broadway in 1964 at the Martin Beck Theater, now called the Al Hirschfeld. I Had a Ball saw Buddy Hackett as Garside the Great, a phony fortune teller on the Coney Island boardwalk who comes to find that his crystal ball can actually see into the future. The main romantic plot concerned Garside's friend and recent parolee Stan and the Ferris wheel operator Jeannie, played by Richard Kiley and Karen Morrow respectively. The show is an interesting snapshot of the musical comedies of the 1960s meant to entertain the proverbial tired businessmen, and if you want to know more about it, I recommend my full Broadway breakdown of the show, which saw star Buddy Hackett get into many more shenanigans than the script called for. Looking at a recent musical with the History on Stage category and the $600 clue. The musical Harmony, about the real-life singing group the Comedian Harmonists, opened on Broadway in 2023 with a score by Bruce Sussman and this Copacabana singer-songwriter. Who is Barry Manilow? The real Comedian Harmonists were a hugely popular comedic close harmony singing group from Germany in the late 1920s and early 30s. As you may have deduced from the location and the time period, the singing group, with a few Jewish members, butt heads with the rising Nazi party. The musical's gestation period was vast, playing an engagement in San Francisco in 1997. The musical bounced around for decades before opening off-Broadway in 2022 and then transferring to Broadway in 2023. The musical starred Chip Zien, Sierra Boggess, and Julie Benko and played for a little over 4 months, including previews. Wrapping our heads around the Turban Outfitters category gives us the $600 visual clue. This character from Andrew Lloyd Webber's Sunset Boulevard frequently sported a turban in the show's original production. Who is Norma Desmond? The complicated fading movie star is one of those roles like Madame Rose in Gypsy that actresses love to sink their dramatic teeth into. The character's signature turban was thrown out for the current revival of Sunset Boulevard, along with all the costumes and set and any sense of realism. And looking off-Broadway with the book, music, and lyrics category, the $600 clue there is: this long-running off-Broadway show was habit-forming for its author Dan Goggins, who wrote 6 different sequels to the hit musical. What is Nonsense? Nonsense, for a time the second longest running off-Broadway musical of all time, has one of the oddest backstories on how it came to be. The show's creator, Dan Goggin, had a mannequin dressed up in a nun's habit in his apartment named Sister Mary Mannequin, naturally, and she became quite the local celebrity. Her fame somehow encouraged Goggin to make a 12-card pack of greeting cards featuring the nuns doing funny things, which he would sell out of the trunk of his car in the village. The greeting cards became a hit, and the sassy illustrations inspired Goggin to create a cabaret act featuring the nuns. The cabaret was booked at the well-known Duplex Theater in the village for 4 days, but the reception for the piece kept it there for 38 weeks. The show was then adapted into the revue-like musical it is today, which remains a hugely popular show among regional and amateur theaters. It's time to turn the difficulty up a notch with the $800 round, but before we do, please, oh pretty please, hit that like button for me if you're enjoying this week's game. It really helps me get these videos shown to more fine folks like yourselves, but also makes me feel like a million fake dollars. Alright, did you click it? Okay. Thank you. I really do appreciate it. Back again at the It Started at Encores category, your first $800 clue is: Jason Robert Brown's Parade, which was revived in 2023 after starting at Encores, is about the real-life persecution of Leo Frank, who was accused of killing this young girl. Who is Mary Fagan is the answer. Mary Fagan was a 13-year-old employee of the pencil factory in Atlanta, Georgia, where Leo Frank was a manager. Leo Frank, a Jewish man, was arrested for her murder, furthering anti-Semitism pervading the South at that point. The trial of Leo Frank and the tragic outcome, too involved to get into here, was national news, and the incident led to the creation of the Jewish Defense League, as well as the re-emergence of the KKK. The revival of the musical starred Ben Platt as Leo Frank, with Michaela Diamond as his devoted wife Lucille. The production would go on to win Best Revival of a Musical at that year's Tony Awards.
It means a man who isn't guilty doesn't have to walk the plank. It means the gallows still are vacant, and we've got my wife to thank. It means you shouldn't underestimate Lucille and Leo Frank, 'cause this is not over yet.
Crossing the bridge to the Brooklyn category, your next $800 clue is: in Newsies, this feared newsy leader comes to Jack's rescue with the famous line, "Never fear, Brooklyn is here." Who is Spot Conlon is the answer. Spot Conlon was actually a real-life figure who spoke for the Brooklyn Newsboys during the early days of the strike in 1899. He was played in the original film version by Gabriel Damon, who was also the voice of Littlefoot in the first Land Before Time film. Spot Conlon on Broadway was originated by Tommy Bracco, who competed on the 21st season of Big Brother. In the London production of Newsies, the producers made the major change of having Spot Conlon and the whole gang of Brooklyn Newsies be female. There were actually lots of female Newsies at the time of the strike in 1899, despite the film and Broadway productions of Newsies being a big boys club. Open your textbook, students, for the History on Stage category and the $800 clue. The World War II set musical Allegiance followed the Kimura family, who were forced into a Japanese-American internment camp. The musical was based on the real-life experience of this famous actor, who also starred in the musical. Who is George Takei is the answer. The actor, best known for his work on Star Trek, was taken as a young child along with his family to one of several Japanese internment camps set up by the fearful US government following the attacks on Pearl Harbor. Certainly one of the many stains on this country's history. Inspired by conversations with Takei about his experiences, the musical has a score by Jay Kuo and a book by Kuo along with Lorenzo Theone and Mark Aceto, who also wrote one of my favorite musical theater-related young adult fiction novels, How I Paid for College, a novel of sex, theft, friendship, and musical theater. Anyway, besides Mr. Takei, the musical also starred Telly Leung and Lea Salonga. Fortunately, the musical was filmed and a pro shot is available to check out on Broadway HD.
We are in the Cuckoo Mountains, in the middle of war. We are stronger than before.
The $800 visual clue in the Turban Outfitters category is Lillias White, seen here, played the title character's mother in this 2009 jukebox musical. What is Fela is the right answer. Fela uses the music of its subject, Fela Kuti, a prominent Nigerian singer and activist. Conceived, directed, and choreographed by Bill T. Jones, the musical first played off-Broadway in 2008 and then transferred to Broadway in 2009. Tony winner Lillias White played Fumileo, Fela's mother in the musical.
Let the heavens weep. Soon the earth will laugh. The laughter give birth to bud. The bud bloom into flower. The flower grow to tree. A mighty tree ready for the next storm.
In finishing up the round with the book, music, and lyrics category brings us the $800 clue. With book, music, and lyrics by Michael R. Jackson, the musical A Strange Loop is about this character, whose name is also his theater-related job title. Who is Usher is the correct answer. A Strange Loop, which won the 2020 Pulitzer Prize for Drama as well as the 2022 Tony for Best Musical, follows Usher, who is an usher for The Lion King on Broadway in the show. An ensemble of 6 individuals play all the other roles in the show as well as the different inner thoughts in Usher's head. Playing Usher in the original off-Broadway run of the musical was Larry Owens, who you might recognize from his work on TV, including playing Jacob's boyfriend Zach on Abbott Elementary. Owens won the Lucille Lortel and Drama Desk Award for A Strange Loop, but did not transfer to the show when it reached Broadway. On Broadway, Usher was originated by Jaquel Spivey, who also starred in the film version of the Mean Girls musical as Damien. We've reached that point, my friends. The big show, the main event. It's the $1,000 round. Play that dramatic music, white boy. Best of luck, players. Starting one last time in the It Started at Encores category, your first $1,000 clue is the first Broadway production of this off-Broadway musical about a woman who seeks healing from a televangelist started at Encores in a one-night-only concert. What is Violet is the answer. Based on the short story The Ugliest Pilgrim by Doris Betts, the musical, with a score by Janine Tesori and Brian Crawley, follows Violet Carl, a young woman who was disfigured in a childhood accident and is now on her way, via bus, to seek healing from a popular televangelist. The musical first premiered off-Broadway at Playwrights Horizons in 1997, starring Lauren Ward, the original Miss Honey in Broadway's Matilda, with Michael Park and Michael McElroy also among the cast. Violet then played City Center Encores in a one-night-only concert version starring Sutton Foster in summer of 2013. Inspired by the reception to the piece, a Broadway revival was mounted by the Roundabout Theatre Company the following year, with Sutton Foster returning to star along with Joshua Henry and Colin Donnell.
Before another sunrise wakes me, before another night is gone, I'll find out where this highway takes me. You know I've got to travel on. Jordan River's where you'll find me. It's far but not too wide to go.
Looking at a major flop in the Brooklyn category gives us the $1,000 clue. This mega flop musical was about a man who attempts to jump off the Brooklyn Bridge. What is Kelly is the right answer. Before Carrie the Musical or Moose Murders, the flop to end all flops was Kelly. The musical Kelly, which had a score by Eddie Lawrence and Moose Charlap, was about a man named Hop Kelly, an amateur daredevil who plans on jumping off the Brooklyn Bridge as a stunt, with several gangsters betting against him surviving. The musical was somewhat based on a true story, actually. When the musical began its pre-Broadway engagement in Philadelphia, it was clearly in need of major help, and several show doctors were brought in, including Mel Brooks. Several characters and scenes were cut, but the show was still in major trouble, and after 7 previews, Kelly ended up closing on its opening night, becoming one of the biggest disasters in Broadway history up until then. The $1,000 clue for the History on Stage category is... Starring Joel Grey and Bernadette Peters, this 1968 musical was about one of the most significant figures in American musical theater history. What is George M. is the answer, all about the life of George M. Cohan. George M. Cohan really put the American in American musical theater, though mostly remembered today from James Cagney's portrayal of him in the 1942 film Yankee Doodle Dandy. Cohan was a pioneer in the theater and introduced some of the earliest show tune hits like Give My Regards to Broadway, You're a Grand Old Flag, and The Yankee Doodle Boy. George M., the moderately successful 1968 musical about Cohan's life, featured the songs of George M. Cohan with Joel Grey in the title role, along with Bernadette Peters as Josie Cohan, and Jamie Donnelly, best known as Jan in the stage and film versions of Grease, as Ethel Levy, Cohan's first wife. Our last visual clue for $1,000 in the Turban Outfitters category is... The iconic Eartha Kitt, seen here, starred in this musical, a reworked version of the musical Kismet. What is Timbuktu is the right answer. As the clue stated, the 1978 musical was a reworked version of the 1954 musical Kismet. Kismet takes place in ancient Arabian Nights-esque Baghdad. For Timbuktu, the musical was reset in Timbuktu in West Africa around the time of the Mali Empire in 1361. Eartha Kitt in the musical played the ravishing Shalim Laloum.
Timbuktu, the new Broadway musical. Melba Moore, Gilbert Price, Ara Hawkins, Eartha Kitt.
Welcome to Timbuktu.
Directed and choreographed by Jeffrey Holder, based on Kismet, and unlike anything you've ever seen, except maybe somewhere in a dream.
And the curtain call clue in the book, music, and lyrics category is... Featuring a cast solely of young people, this 1978 musical boasted book, music, and lyrics by Elizabeth Swados. What is Runaways? Elizabeth Swados, who not only wrote the book, music, and lyrics for the original production, but directed and choreographed as well, developed the musical through workshops in the late 1970s, similar to how A Chorus Line came to be. But instead of interviewing dancers, Miss Swados went to community centers and homeless shelters, interviewing young runaways about their experiences. From those workshops, the revue musical came to be, starring 20 young people, some of which were actually runaways. The stories were told through song, dance, monologues, and poems. And now we've reached the final Jeopardy round, players. Tally up those scores so far and decide how much you want to wager in the category The Oscars. Looking at some film adaptations and original movie musicals that have won Academy Awards. Okay, has everyone made their wagers? Janelle? Spence? John? Okay, here is your final clue. This 1951 movie musical won 7 Academy Awards, 64 years before its stage adaptation reached Broadway. What is An American in Paris? The classic movie musical, which starred Gene Kelly, Oscar Levant, and Leslie Caron in her screen debut, was based on the symphonic poem of the same name by George Gershwin. The movie features songs from the Gershwin catalog and was directed by the great Vincent Minnelli. The new version of the musical, with a book by playwright Craig Lucas, did not have its tryout in the States, but rather in Paris, France, which obviously is pretty appropriate. After some revisions, the musical finally bowed on Broadway in 2015, starring Robbie Fairchild and Leanne Cope in the Gene Kelly and Leslie Caron roles, respectively. And that's this week's game! How did you all do this week? Do you feel like you own Broadway, or do you need to relocate to Timbuktu? Be sure to let me know how you did in the comments. I love hearing from you guys and seeing your scores. A special huge shout out, of course, to my amazing patrons over on Patreon. I literally could not keep making these weekly videos without your support. I'll be doing an exclusive Patreon member live stream soon where you can hang out with me and chat and do some Q&As. So if you want to join in that, as well as supporting the channel, you can check out the Patreon, which is linked in the video description. There's also a link to my merch shop with fun designs there, including the new Broadway Jeopardy champion design. And should you get any of the merch from my merch shop, or if you've done so already, send me a pic of you wearing it, and I'd love to throw it up on screen in a future episode and give you a little shout out. Of course, another amazing way to support me and Broadway Jeopardy is to share these videos with anyone and everyone to get the word out. You can follow me over on Blue Sky if you want to connect with me outside of YouTube. I will be back next week with episode 38, but until then, I'm Mark Benani. This is Broadway by Ghostlight. Thanks for playing.
Timbuktu.